I think you can see my screen now.
Yeah, I can see
Okay,
your screen.
perfect, perfect. Okay, so hi everyone again, and I would say good afternoon or good evening here in Europe, but maybe some of you are located somewhere else. So also good morning to all of you who are joining from other parts of the planet. And first of all, thanks to Marvin and Philip for inviting me to present at Power BI User Group Cologne meeting. And today I would like to talk about one of the non-glorified but very important features in Power BI, or to be more specific, in Power Query Engine, and that feature is query folding. Will that break a query folding? Does your query fold? Maybe someone asked you those questions, but you're like, query what? Or maybe you've heard about query folding, but didn't know exactly how to take advantage of it in real life scenarios. So if you recognize yourself in at least one of those two questions or two situations that I mentioned, then this session I would say is for you. We will learn what is query folding, in which scenarios Power BI will apply it, and how you as a Power BI developer can benefit from understanding this concept. But before we start, I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Nikola Ilic. I'm originally from Belgrade in Serbia, but I live in beautiful city of Salzburg in Austria for last almost 6 years, where I work as a manager analytics for Whaaaat, joint venture company from Microsoft and Accenture. Living in Salzburg was the reason why I've chosen my nickname Data Mozart. I assume you're familiar that Salzburg is worldly famous as a birthplace of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Therefore, I was brave enough to take his last name as part of my nickname. You can find me on web. I'm regularly blogging at data-mozart.com. I'm also active on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, so feel free to connect if you like. A few more sentences about me. I have multiple year experience working with different data products, predominantly Microsoft Data Platform. Uh, Started with SQL Server, then continue with analysis services, reporting service, integration services, and most recently, if you consider last, let's say, 4 years or more with Power BI. Other than that, I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and Microsoft Certified Trainer. Privately, father of 2 kids and true football and Barca fan, as you can conclude looking at the photos on your screens. So let me briefly walk you through the contents of our session today. We will kick it off by talking about data shaping as one of the most important concepts in the data preparation process in order to put our discussion in the proper context. Then I will spend a few minutes describing Power Query, as this is the environment where query folding uh, exists or not. Then we will focus on explaining what is a query folding and why should you understand this feature in a proper way. After that, you will see why people say that the devil is in the detail. I'll try to show you a few tips and tricks related to query folding and how to avoid those possible challenges. Of course, there will be a few demos along the way, and we will wrap it up with the recommendations on how to proceed further from this session and deepen your knowledge regarding query folding. Okay, data shaping. Story about data shaping starts in a quite unusual way, I'd say. I guess you all know or you heard about the book written by Thomas More called Utopia. And in that story, in Utopia land, everything is perfect and everyone is satisfied. In this ideal world, in our ideal world, let's call it data utopia, we have clean, high quality data that just comes into our reports as it is, without needing from us to perform any kind of transformations or facelifting along the way. Unfortunately, those things can exist only in books or movies. In real world, data utopia, of course, doesn't exist. So we need to deal with a whole bunch of different challenges while nurturing our data. And that being said, one of the key concepts that we have to understand is data shaping. Data shaping is the process you should perform once you get familiar with your data and become aware of possible pitfalls within the data you are planning to use in your business intelligence solution. I've intentionally used here term business intelligence instead of Power BI, as this is more of a general concept that should be used outside of Power BI solutions too. In most simple words, data shaping is the process of data consolidation before it becomes part of your data model. The key thing, or let's say the key word to keep in mind here is before. So one would perform data shaping before the data goes into the report itself. Data shaping can be done at different places, and depending on where you apply data shaping techniques at different points in time during the data preparation process. So the legitimate question now is, where should I perform data shaping? First, source database. This is the most obvious choice, and I would say in most cases that's the most desirable scenario. It's based on traditional data warehousing principles of extracting, transforming, and loading data, or ETL abbreviated. And in this scenario, you define what data you want to extract, as in most cases, not all data from the database is needed for your solution. Then you decide if your data needs to be transformed along the way to better suit your reporting needs. For example, do you want to perform currency conversion? Do you want to conform country names or city names? And that being said, do you recognize the city on the screen? Yes, it's New York. Or is it NYC? Or is it New York City? So which one of these three names is correct? Yes, all of them are correct, of course. But if you import the data the way it's shown here in this slide, you will get incorrect results in your report, as each name will be treated as a separate entity. So this and many more potential caveats need to be solved during the data shaping phase, and that's why it is important to spend some time preparing our data. And here I always like to quote one sentence from former US President Abraham Lincoln, who said that if he had to cut the tree in 6 hours, he'll spend first 4 hours preparing his axe. So it's of key importance to spend some time, to dedicate time to prepare for the final task that you are planning to do. So if you don't perform data transformations on the source side, the next station is Power Query. Power Query is the built-in tool within Power BI that enables you to perform all kinds of transformations to your data. Last time I checked on Microsoft's official documentation site, you can apply more than 300 different transformations, and that number is constantly increasing. The key advantage of Power Query is that you can perform really complex data transformations with little or no coding skills at all. And additionally, all steps that you've applied during this data transformation process are being saved. So every time you go back and refresh your data set, those steps will be automatically applied, and they will shape your data and prepare it for the report. Under the hood of Power Query is a mashup engine that enables your data shaping process to run smoothly. Power Query uses very powerful M language for data manipulation. And now you're probably asking yourselves what all this story about data shaping and Power Query, mashup engine, M language, and so on has to do with query folding. I don't blame you, it's a fair question, but we will come back soon to answer it. For some data sources, such as relational databases, but also for some non-relational data sources like OData or Active Directory or Exchange, a mashup engine is able to translate M language to a language that this underlying data source will understand. In most cases, it's SQL, but yeah, we will mention again those non-SQL sources that support query folding. What's the logic here? By pushing those complex calculations and transformations directly to a source, Power Query leverages capabilities of those strong, robust relational database engines that are built to cope with large volumes of data in the most efficient way. And that ability of Power Query's mashup engine to create a single SQL statement that combines all M statements behind your transformations is what we call query folding. Or let's try to make it simple. If the mashup engine is able to generate a single SQL query that is going to be executed on the data source side, we say that the query faults. As I already mentioned, the most obvious beneficiary of query folding are relational database sources, of course, such as SQL Server or Oracle or MySQL. However, it's not just that SQL databases take advantage of the query folding concept. Essentially, any data source that supports some kind of querying language can possibly take advantage of query folding. Those other data sources are already mentioned OData or SQL Server Analysis Services, SharePoint lists also, Exchange, and Active Directory. On the other hand, when you use data sources such as Excel files or blob storage files or flat files and so on, in your Power BI datasets, query can't fold. Now, don't be confused when it comes to data sources that support query folding in general, like SQL databases, for example. It's important to keep in mind that not all transformations can be folded and pushed to a data source. So just to be clear, a fact that SQL database supports query folding doesn't necessarily mean that your query will fold. There are some Power Query transformations that simply can't be pushed to a SQL database engine. And very often you will see some subtle differences in the Power Query transformations can be decisive in the final outcome and if your query will fold or not. I'll show you a few of those subtle differences later during the demo. So generally speaking, the following transformations when applied in Power Query can be translated to a single SQL statement. So transformations like removing columns, renaming columns, filtering rows with that means with static values or Power Query parameters, as they are treated as where clause predicates in SQL. Then grouping and summarizing, which have equivalent in SQL's group by clause. Then also merging of foldable queries based on the same source. This operation will be translated to join in SQL language. When I say merging of foldable queries, that means it will work if you are joining two SQL Server tables, but it will not work if you're trying to join, let's say, one SQL table and one Excel file. Also appending foldable queries based on the same source, same as for the previous case. This transformation relates to union all operator in SQL. Adding custom columns with simple logic. What is a simple logic? That's a good question. So that means using M functions that have their equivalents in SQL language. For example, mathematical functions like calculating absolute value or something like this, or text manipulation functions like replacing values and so on and so on. And finally, pivot and unpivot transformations should also fold. On the other hand, some transformations that will prevent query from folding are merging queries based on different sources. I explained in the previous case how it works. So if you're merging SQL table and Excel file, that will not fold. Also appending queries based on different sources, same logic as in the previous case. Adding custom columns with complex logic or using some M functions that don't have counterpart in SQL language. Also, this one is very important. Adding index columns will always break query folding. And one interesting case, changing a column data type. This one is typically depends. I will show you later on what it depends, but just keep in mind that changing a column data type can be both foldable and non-foldable transformation. Okay, as we explained, what is query folding, which data sources support query folding, and which transformations within the data source itself, let's now talk and examine why is it important to achieve this behavior, or maybe it's better to say, why should you care if the query folds or not? So when you're using import mode in Power BI, data refresh process will work much more efficient when the query folds, both in terms of refresh speed and resource consumption. If you're working with direct query or dual storage mode, as basically you're retrieving data directly from the SQL database at the query time, all your transformations must fold. So they must be translated to SQL or your solution will simply not work. Finally, query folding is also of paramount importance for incremental refresh, and it's so important that Power BI will warn you once it determines that query folding can't be achieved. It will not break your incremental refresh process, but without query folding in place, incremental refresh wouldn't serve its main purpose. And its main purpose is to reduce the amount of data that needs to be refreshed in your data model. So without query folding, Mashup engine will retrieve all the data from the source and then apply all subsequent transformation steps to filter data. So basically you are surrendering the advantage of incremental refresh. With all this in mind, you should tend to achieve query folding whenever possible. One important disclaimer here, and this is one of the key things to remember from this session. If your report is slow, or your visuals need a lot of time to render, or your data model size is too big, so query folding has nothing to do with it. Only if your data refresh or incremental refresh are slow and inefficient, you should investigate your Power Query steps in more detail. Also, few more things to keep in mind regarding query folding. It's not all or nothing process. That means if you have, let's say, 8 transformation steps within Power Query and your query folds until 5th step, you will still get some benefit from partial query folding. However, once you break the query folding, it can't be achieved anymore. To simplify, looking at this screenshot that I provided here in the presentation, that means even if you have some steps that should fold by default, like filtering rows here, let me zoom it a little bit. So this one should fold, this step should fold. But if you break the query folding, all steps, all subsequent steps will not fold. Keep that in mind. And if you need to use some non-foldable transformation, try to push it down the pipeline as much as possible. So move it here, so that all the previous steps can fold. Okay, we are not rookies anymore. We know what is query folding and why should we strive to achieve it, and some subtle tricks that can make a huge difference. Now it's time to learn how can we check if the specific query folds or not. The first and most obvious way is to right click on the transformation step and check how view native query option looks like. If it's grayed out, like in this screenshot, this step probably doesn't fold. On the other hand, if you're able to click on this option, that means that your query will fold. And I guess you're maybe confused with word probably here, but that's the proper word, as you can't rely 100% on this view native query option. Sometimes it will be disabled even though your query is folding in the background. I will show you in a few minutes how can this option trick us to think that the query folding was broken, even though that in reality folding actually occurred. Instead, whenever you want to be 100% sure if your query folds or not, you can use query diagnostics feature within Power BI, Power Query Editor, sorry, or SQL Server Profiler as a good, old, and reliable way to check the queries sent to a database by the Power BI engine. Additionally, there is a cool feature. It's not so new anymore in Power Query Online, where each step is marked with the icon that shows if the specific step is folding, not folding, or if it's unknown. As I said, this feature is currently available only in Power Query Online, but let's hope that Power BI team and engineers will implement it also in Power BI desktop version. Fine, I already told you that during our session you will find out why people say that the devil is in the detail. And now it's time to understand how little nuances can make a big difference in our data transformation process. So I think we are ready to get our hands dirty and learn query folding on practical examples. Okay, first one, changing data type. This one is interesting. Maybe I mentioned already in the previous part of the session. Let's go to Power Query Editor and I will explain what I'm doing. Just a second to move this here. Okay. Okay, so fine. I have just one table. I'm using sample database Contoso, just fact table, nothing special here. But I want to demonstrate how changing data type can be both foldable and non-foldable transformation. So here you see that I have this date key column, which is of date time data type. Now let's say that I want to change to get rid of this time portion here. I don't need it for my report, and I want to keep only date here. There are multiple different ways to change the data type of the column. Personally, what I'm always doing, right click on the column, change type, and then from date time, I'm changing this to date. You see that this change was applied, and here, if you right click on the transformation step, you see that this view native query option is enabled. So I can click on it and see the SQL query that Mashup engine generated for me. Here it is. I'm converting my date key column. I'm converting it to date. Okay, so we know that this query false. Sorry, going back to Power Query Editor. And now I want you to pay attention to one to the formula that Mashup engine generated for us. You can check it here in this formula editor, and it's table.transform column types. Table.transform column types. Please try to remember this if possible. Let's get rid of this last step. The other way that you can keep only date and get rid of time portion is, again, right click, and it's so close to change type. But instead of change type, I will use transform and select date only. So you see that the outcome is exactly the same. I got rid of my time portion here. But now instead of table.transform column types, I have table.transform columns. So basically just a few letters, just one word. But it's completely different function. And from SQL perspective, this one can't be translated to SQL. So now Mashup engine will do the whole job. In this case, it will not cause any performance issues because we don't do anything. But I will show you later if we apply additional transformation steps, how this one small thing can cause significant performance issues. So be careful when you are changing data types of your column. Always go to change type and then select the type you want to preserve. That was the devil number one. Devil number two is native SQL query. And this is one of the most important considerations when it comes to query folding. Because one of the first decisions you need to make when you are importing data to your in your Power BI report is, should I import the data as it is and then do all my transformations in Power Query? Or should I write SQL query if I'm more proficient with SQL? Let's say, should I write my SQL query by hand and select specific data that I want to return? If you choose this latter option with writing SQL, once you write custom SQL statement, your query folding is broken. It's gone. Whatever step you apply after the original one, it will not fold. Even if you wish to filter the rows, which is always foldable step, in this case, it will not fold. So once you've written your SQL code to retrieve the data, you close the door for query folding. Or maybe not. There are some cool tricks that I want to show you in a few minutes. Chris Webb wrote a blog post last year where he explained how you can explicitly enable query folding on your handwritten SQL query. So let's see how you can change the default behavior of the native query folding. I will show you both examples without using this explicit instruction for query folding and with writing this function, of course. So again, I'm here in my Power Query Editor, and let's say that this one is too big, so it has 12.6 million rows. Let's say that I want a smaller table. Let's go to my SQL Server, and I will connect to my Contoso database. And I want to write my SQL statement by hand. And let's say that I want to import all the records from DIM product. I think this table has around 2,000 to 3,000 rows. So select star from dim product. Okay, let's wait for a few moments until Power BI imports the data. That's it. Okay. And now you see that I have my dim product table here in Power Query Editor. Now let's say that I want to filter out all the brands except Contoso. So I want to, let me first check how many rows do we have. So I do count rows, 2.5 thousand rows, 2.5 thousand rows, okay? And let's say that I want to keep only Contoso here in my table. So I will go to brand name, I'll deselect all and leave only Contoso. Now, if I right click on this step where I filtered out data, you see that view native query option is disabled. So what will happen if I hit close and apply? Power BI, don't pay attention to this one. So Power BI will load, let's see, 2.5 thousand rows, and then it will filter out those that we don't need and keep only those 600 and something rows. So basically, the first step is that it will pull all the data from the SQL Server. Okay, let's get rid. So this one shows you that query folding was broken when you use native SQL query. I will delete this one, and I'll go back to again to my SQL Server. We will do a slightly different approach. So again, let's connect to my SQL Server. I will not specify anything here, so I want to have a selection between all the elements of my Contoso database. And once it shows me all the objects available, I will go to Contoso and dim product is here. Okay, I will import dim product. Okay, so more or less we are doing the same like usual with importing data. Now what I need to do, what I can do. So here after this step called navigation, if I right click on it, I can insert step manually after that. So I will choose this option, insert step after, and that will enable me to write my M formula directly in the formula bar. So here I will use this famous value dot native query function, M function, and here you specify this function supports 4 different arguments. So first argument is the name of the database, which is Contoso. I have problems with typing, sorry about that. The second one is the query, basically. So I want to repeat the same query I had in the previous part of the demo. So select star from dim product. Okay, so that's the same query like we had. Then the third argument can be omitted. I don't need it. And so now, and finally, the last argument is called enable folding. Enable folding. I think I typed that correct. And I will explicitly set these to true. Okay. Probably I misspelled something. Okay, let me just, so we don't waste time, let me just pull it from here. Probably I missed something, but never mind. Let's just grab the different table, dim product. Okay. And I will now confirm this. Okay. Again, we have all the products in 2.5 thousand rows. And you see that this query faults. Let's do the same thing we did in the previous part. So I filtered out all the brands except Contoso. So I will keep only Contoso. In previous case, this broke query folding. Now, if I right click on this, you see that view native query option is enabled. And let's open it. Oops, sorry. You see that our filtering condition now was pushed to a SQL database and translated to this nice where clause. And Power BI in this case should pull only those 600 rows from the SQL database. Let's see if that's the case. Instead of 2,500. It's 700, sorry. But yeah, basically the thing we did, we just pushed the filtering condition on the SQL database side. So it's possible to do a lot of things with this value.native query, and it's fine. So using this, let me just zoom it, this enable folding parameter and setting its value to true. But for example, it still has a lot of limitations. For example, you can't do joins. If I were to write here like select star from dim product and then do inner join of some other table, that will not work. So this value.native query function at this moment doesn't support joining of the table. So you can explicitly enable query folding only over one single table. Keep that in mind. But who knows, maybe in a few months or so, we get a solution also for native SQL query to support joins and stuff like that. Okay, let me delete this one because we don't need it anymore. Okay, the next one I want to show you is devil number 3. I mentioned already that view native query option sometimes may trick you, sometimes can lie. So let me show you this very cool example. Let's say that here, okay, let's say that I want to, where is my fact online sales table? Aha, okay, so it's here. Fine. So let's say that I want to keep only first 2000 rows for testing purposes, for whatever. So I'll go here on the top and select keep top rows. And when I'm prompted to enter the number of rows that I want to keep, I will keep my first 2000 rows. This one is folding. Okay, view native query option is enabled. And or let me just first do something. Let's make it simpler. So I will keep only few columns here, and let's keep sales amount. So again, I will go to keep rows and I'll keep 2000 rows. As you see, this query is folding. This is our keeping rows is translated to top clause in SQL Server. And now let's say that I want to calculate absolute value of my sales amount. You will assume that absolute value is a simple mathematical function that can be translated. In the end, in T-SQL, there is an ABS function that supports converting values to absolute value, to calculating absolute values. But if you right click now on this step, view native query option is disabled. So you can think that this query is not folding. But if you go to tools on the top, this is the query diagnostics tool in Power Query Editor, which is quite handy. And you can quickly check if your query is folding or not. Many other different metrics behind your queries, but let's focus now on this one. If I click on Diagnose tab, this will run the series of queries in the background, and I will get my data here in the form of queries on the left-hand side, detailed, partition, so on and so on. If I go to this aggregated table values, there are different things here that you can investigate, analyze, like starting time, ending time, duration, and so on and so on. But in my case, I'm interested to see the data source query. So that's the query that Power Query Mashup Engine generated and sent to an underlying database. And I would expect that there is no query folding in this case. But here is the query. And here is the ABS function. So this query folds. Our transformations. So you see whenever you see top 1000, that means that Power Query is getting a sample of data from your database, and you can be, let's say, 99% sure that your query is folding. And here is our transformation. Here is our ABS absolute value, nicely translated to ABS function. So don't always trust view native query options. Sometimes it can trick you. In 99% of case, of course, it will show you the correct results, but sometimes it's not. Okay, so going back to our presentation, if I didn't manage to convince you so far why you should strive to achieve query folding, let me now try to pull my last ace up the sleeve, and I will show you the difference in performance between the queries that return exactly the same results. One of them is folding and the other is not folding. Okay, so let's go again to Power Query Editor and to our fact online sales table. Let's remove this and let's start fresh from the beginning. Let's do some, I would say, common transformations on our fact table. So I will go and let's first grab some fields from dim customer. So I'll take first name and last name and let's say gender. Okay, so you see that I expanded my dim customer table. Then let's say that I want to transform all of the first names of my customers to be uppercased. Then let's change the data type, the famous one. I will now use the foldable transformation. So I will right click on the column, change type, and from date time, I will change it to date. So you see that we have only dates here. Now, let's say that I want to calculate, I don't know, sales amount. Let's calculate absolute value. In real life, you probably will not use all of those transformation steps so frequently. This is just for the demo purposes, but I think you will get the point. Then let's do some filtering. For example, I want to keep in total cost column, I want to keep only those rows where total cost is greater than 5. Then let's say that I want to get rid of this ETL load ID column. Then what else we can do? Let's do some replacement. Let's replace here in our gender column. Let's replace F with female. Okay. And finally, let's keep only those orders where sales amount is large. So we are interested only in analyzing large sales. Let's keep only those rows where sales amount is greater than, let's say, 500. Okay. Now, once it's done, I'll check this last step, and you see that view native query option is enabled. If I click on it, there is a nice SQL query. I'm joking, it's not nice SQL query. It may look awkward if you are coming from SQL world. That may look a kind of strange with those subqueries and everything else. But keep in mind in the end that Power Query Engine produces correct SQL. So you will get back the results you asked for, but it's not always the most optimal SQL code. Just keep that in mind. And you see all our transformations. Let me show you here. So we uppercased our first name, we converted date, we calculated absolute value, we replaced F with female. That's all fine. But the most important things are those here at the bottom. This where clause will filter out all the rows where sales amount is lower or equal to 500. So it will keep only those rows where sales amount is greater than 500. And this one will keep only those rows where total cost is greater than 5. Okay, so now this query is folding. We confirm this. I'll hit close and apply. And let's wait, hopefully not so long, for Power BI to reload the data. we have 12.6 million rows, so it will take approximately, I think, maybe 1 minute or something like this. Or maybe, or yeah, we filter out the rows, so we will have a lower number of rows. Let's see how many. I think that's it. Okay, basically 1.5 million rows. 1.5 million rows were loaded in, let's say, 20, 30 seconds. Okay, with query folding in place. Now I will go back to my Power Query editor. And now where we change type of our date column, I will delete this step. And now I will insert a new step. Again, I will change this to get rid of time portion. I will just keep date here. Of course, I'm now intentionally breaking query folding. You shouldn't do this. This is just for the demo purpose. So just to show you the difference in performance. So now instead of change type, I will go to transform and I will keep date only. Power BI asks me if I'm sure that I want to insert the step. Yes, I'm sure. And the outcome is the same. So we don't have time portion here. But if I now right click on this last step, view native query option is disabled. So this query doesn't fold anymore. And if I go one by one to identify which step broke my query folding, this one doesn't fold, this one is folding. So basically we achieved partial query folding. What that means, let me show you. You remember the query from the previous part where we have a replace and absolute value and everything else. Now we have only this upper transformation, which happens before the query folding was broken. And there are no where clauses down below. Okay, so completely different SQL query. I hate this, but never mind. And if I now hit close and apply, let's see what happens. So in the end, we should get the same number of records, 1.5 million records. The first thing you may notice is that batches of rows that goes to Power BI are smaller than in the previous case. In the previous case, those batches were 80,000, 100,000 rows per batch. Now it goes a little bit slower and in smaller batches. So, but we are almost here. Oops. What happened here? We know that we have 1.5 million rows. So why Power BI continue to load the data? Because query folding was broken. No where clauses. So what happens here? Power BI talks to SQL Server and tells SQL Server, give me all data from Fact Online sales table. No where clause. I don't want only those that are greater than 500. Give me all data. And SQL Server says, okay, here is your data. Here is your 12.6 million rows. And then you do whatever you want after you load 12.6 million rows. And this will take around, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes. Maybe not 4 or 5 minutes, but let's say 3 minutes. So it's 7, 8 times slower than in the previous case when we had query folding. I will leave this to run just to show you that the final result will be the same. But in the first case, when Power Query Engine and SQL Server were talking, Power Query told SQL Server, okay, here is the query. Give me only those rows where sales amount is greater than 500. And SQL Server says, okay, I will leave out all those that don't satisfy this criteria. Here is your 1.5 million rows. And we got already filtered, already prepared data, and in 20 or 30 seconds. Now you see that this takes, let's say, 3-4 minutes. While we are waiting, if there are any questions, because we will have like maybe 2-3 minutes until this is done. And we are slowly wrapping up, I would say. Philip, I can't hear you. I don't know if you're muted or.
Oh,
Okay.
The headset was wrong.
No problem.
I don't see any questions inside the chat, but if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, so we will wait maybe yeah, we are close to an end. I just wanted to show you that the outcome is the same, but instead of having it in 20-30 seconds, you need to wait 3 minutes. And this is just a small table, you know, when you're importing data from larger tables, the difference is even bigger. Okay, so not 12.6 million rows, but 11 million rows, and in the end, you see that this number is exactly the same, but much worse performance. Okay, so I guess we covered a lot in previous 45 minutes or so. So we explained what is data shaping and why it is important to understand this concept. Then we briefly introduced Power Query, and after that we learned what is a query folding and why should we do our best to achieve it. And I've also shown you some basic examples and neat tricks on how to achieve query folding in some common use cases. Now, if you feel overwhelmed with the amount of information, or even better, if you absorbed everything and now you are ready to expand on the skills you gained today, I've prepared a short list of resources to help you stay on track. The first and the most interesting one is 30 days of query folding challenge, which is free on YouTube, created by Alex Powers from Microsoft. You can also refer to Chris Webb's blog to find. Chris often writes about Power Query and query folding. More tips on this topic, and of course, Microsoft's official documentation, also a good starting point, especially because things are changing in this area. So maybe if you are watching recording after a few months, some of the things I shown you here are fixed, and if something was breaking query folding, now it works. So you should always check before. Yeah, as I said, things are changing in this area. Okay, so before, yeah, I wish you nice rest of the evening, day, or whatever, or good night. Once again, thanks for attending the session. Thanks to Philip and Marvin for inviting me. And I really hope that you get a better understanding of the query folding feature and its importance for the optimal data refresh process. Honestly, I always like to quote Ben Watt, our fellow MVP who runs Dublin Power BI user group. He calls query folding unsung hero of Power BI, and I think that's the best description of this concept in this feature, because you will find a lot of more fancy features like AI, key influencers, stuff like this. But this one, query folding, can have a really significant impact on the data refresh process of your reports. Okay, maybe I can also switch to chat now.
I will stop the recording and maybe then someone will ask questions, maybe.